It is Monday, June the 29th, 127 days until the midterm elections. And today, at the hands of the Supreme Court, Donald Trump lost one tool in his voter suppression arsenal, one personal vendetta, and the ability to freely meddle in the Federal Reserve for now. But he didn't lose everything. In one unusual case, he won the kind of sweeping power that is more typically held by kings than by presidents. Now, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here, but stick with me because there are two decisions here that make for one very important story. Let's start with the case around Trump's attempt to fire a woman I'm pretty sure you had never heard of. Last August, Donald Trump tried to fire Lisa Cook, a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, citing a criminal referral filed against her for the latest thing that all the cool kids are getting charged with these days, mortgage fraud. That criminal referral was filed by none other than another guy whose name you'd probably not heard of before a few months ago, Bill Pulte, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Pulte used his authority as the head of a mortgage agency to pull files on people and send them over to the Justice Department. And Trump used this particular file as a reason to get rid of Cook, the first and only black woman to sit on the Federal Reserve Board. But the Supreme Court said today, not so fast. In a 5-4 ruling, the majority said that Cook can stay on the job while she continues to challenge the allegations against her. The justices are not saying that she can't be fired. They're saying the process has to play itself out first. Shortly after the Supreme Court issued its decision, Pulte posted this on social media, quote, "As I have repeatedly said, I believe Lisa Cook will be indicted for mortgage fraud," end quote. Cook's case is tricky for Trump because the Supreme Court sees the Federal Reserve as a, quote, quasi-private, uniquely structured entity. It stands apart from other federal agencies in the government's domain. That's why the second case that the Supreme Court decided today is the thornier one, the one that will have broader implications going forward. The woman at the center of that second case is named Rebecca Slaughter. She was originally appointed by Donald Trump to fill a vacant seat on the Federal Trade Commission. After Slaughter completed her first 7-year term, Biden renominated her. But when Trump returned to office last year, he swiftly fired Slaughter and the other Democratic commissioner, Alvaro Bedoya. In a few moments, I'm going to speak to the former Federal Trade Commission chair, Lina Khan, who served alongside both Slaughter and Bedoya. But listen to what Khan's initial reaction was when I spoke to her about this last year, just days after the two commissioners were fired.
This is blatantly illegal. That's the first thing to know, that the law is crystal clear that commissioners can only be fired if they do something egregiously wrong.
Right.
If they engage in malfeasance, neglect of duty, some type of inefficiency. So there's no gray zone here. What the administration is trying to do by firing them violates the law.
Now, you may not think much about the Federal Trade Commission or the National Labor Relations Board or the Merit Systems Protection Board on a daily basis. But their work is essential in making society function in all sorts of ways. There are about 24 agencies like these. Their jobs are essentially to be government watchdogs, to enforce the laws that are passed by Congress. They're responsible for regulating safety standards, overseeing worker protections, protecting consumers and businesses alike. The list goes on. These agencies are established by congressional statute, and they were intended to be independent, to operate outside of political influence. While their officers are often appointed by a president, they're often led by people who are relative experts in their field. And for the past century, it's been understood that the heads of these agencies don't serve at the whim of the president. When Congress created the Federal Trade Commission in 1914, it included a provision that commissioners could only be removed for, quote, inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance, end quote. 2 decades later, after then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt tried to fire a man named William Humphrey, the Supreme Court upheld that law and said that the president does not have, quote, illimitable power of removal. That case is known as Humphrey's Executor v. the United States. And for 91 years, that was the law. A president could not fire the leaders of independent agencies without cause until today. The 6 conservative justices who make up the majority of the Supreme Court ruled that Trump can fire Slaughter, expanding the powers of the presidency as we know it. Slaughter spoke about her concerns earlier today.
What I'm worried about the most is the way the agencies that are going to use tools that were set up to be applied neutrally without fear or favor, instead to create enormous fear by wielding incredible favors at the president's behest.
But the Supreme Court has unleashed something even more serious than that. In ruling in Trump's favor, it is promoting the unitary executive theory, a concept that's found all over Project 2025. The unitary executive theory seeks to massively expand the power of the presidency, proposing that the president has far broader authority over the executive branch than he currently has. The decision gets us one step closer to handing authoritarian power to a person who aspires to be an authoritarian. And that was the intended result. On social media, Donald Trump called it a, quote, big win, all capitals. He said the quiet part out loud, calling the decision, quote, the greatest increase in presidential power in the last 100 years. The greatest increase in presidential power in the last 100 years. That's not a good thing. My first guest tonight has been referred to as the most consequential Federal Trade Commission chair in the last half a century. Under her leadership, the FTC aggressively enforced existing antitrust laws targeting corporate giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and others. Lina Khan knows what Rebecca Kelly Slaughter is going through because she went through it too. Lina Khan resigned from her position at the FTC on January 31st of 2025, right after Donald Trump's second term began. Joining me now is Lina Khan. Lina, great to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be here.
So let's talk about a couple things. First of all, this business of Lisa Cook at the Fed. You said very, very clearly, you are a lawyer, you said this is illegal. Whether or not, it has not been litigated yet, but it does seem very popular to charge people with mortgage fraud these days. Whether or not that bears out, this is not actually the basis on which you can fire a Federal Reserve chair.
That's
or
right.
Federal Reserve
and the court
Commissioner.
really. That's right. There were two decisions today, one concerning the Federal Trade Commission, which I had the honor of serving at. And that's an agency that is charged with going after corporate misconduct, corporate lawbreaking. When I was at the FTC, that meant we were going after corporate landlords that were ripping off tenants, going after healthcare monopolies that were gouging patients, going after big tech companies that were preying on kids. And basically what the court ruled today is that commissioners of this agency can be fired at the whim of the president. This is coming against the backdrop where we have seen naked corruption, rampant pay to play, really all of these administrative agencies becoming extensions of the president's personal and political grievances. And really it has been enabling massive levels of corruption, allowing the self-enrichment of people close to the president at the expense of working families. And so it is deeply, deeply disturbing to see that now the FTC is basically being given a green light to enable this type of self-enrichment and corruption.
Let's discuss this, because you and I have talked about oligarchy and concentration of power and wealth. When an agency like yours, like the FTC, was empowered to say this particular merger or this particular deal will have a negative effect on a consumer, if all of a sudden the commissioners of these agencies are in the pocket of a president or chosen by and kept in place by a president, you sort of know. What did somebody describe this to me as? It's like the referee knowing that they can be thrown out of their job at any point, right? You're not really as good a referee if you're subject to the whims of the president.
That's right. I mean, there's a long tradition of law enforcement agencies being charged with making decisions based on the facts and the law without fear or favor. And we have seen that totally crumble under this administration, where left and right, all sorts of regulatory decisions, all sorts of law enforcement decisions are being made not based on the law and the facts, but instead to appease the president and appease the wealthy donors and wealthy interests that are in his corner. And so it is a real, descent into corruption that this Supreme Court decision is going to be enabling. It's very interesting to contrast it with the decision that we saw come out concerning the Federal Reserve. It was a slightly different legal question, but the court has signaled that it is much less likely to allow the president to fire arbitrarily governors of the Federal Reserve, governors of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So, there's a real question as to why agencies that are on the front lines of protecting working families are going to be treated from an agency that is, looked to by Wall Street banks, by wealthy interests for financial stability and, the stability of the monetary supply. And even Justice Barrett, writing in one of those decisions, noted that it's very difficult to square these two opinions. And I think people are left to wonder, are we going to see different outcomes based on whether the agency is, servicing Wall Street versus whether it's supposed to be looking out for the small guy?
Yes, and look, they're all important agencies, but that is an important fact, right? The Federal Reserve is very fast if there's a recession or there's COVID or something like that to be able to make sure that the flow of money exists for banks and for corporations. A lot of these other agencies are meant, like yours at the Federal Trade Commission, to make sure that mergers and acquisitions are safe for regular people. One of the things Neil Gorsuch said in his concurrence on the Slaughter case, he said, today, independent agencies do not just exercise executive law enforcement powers. Congress has also delegated them vast legislative and judicial powers, effectively allowing these agencies to make laws and decide disputes against them. And after today's decision, the president can effectively exercise all those powers, too. I only bring this up to you because as chair of the FTC, a lot of people thought you were one of the most effective chairs of the FTC in the last half a century. A lot of people think you are the devil incarnate. But you didn't actually make any laws. I just want to be clear. You didn't make any laws. You took laws that were on the books and decided to enforce them.
That's right. In our constitutional system, it is Congress that writes the laws. And I think this is a really important point because it's important to recognize that both of these decisions are part of an ongoing attack by the Supreme Court on the ability of Congress to govern. This has been, a trend that we've now seen for several years where the Supreme Court is systematically undermining Congress. And what that means is you have our least accountable branch of government undercutting our most accountable branch of government. And that's a real recipe for entrenched minority rule and effectively oligarchy. And so it's important to understand this decision against that backdrop and as part of a broader power grab by the Supreme Court itself.
It is important to note that the FTC and these other agencies are not unregulated themselves. You are accountable to Congress. You get your money from Congress. You don't just sort of run around freely and do whatever you want.
That's right. Sometimes these agencies are described as if they're this unaccountable fourth branch, and that couldn't be further from the truth. As you noted, these agencies are dependent on Congress for their annual budget. There is regular routine oversight. I testified before Congress countless times. There's an enormous amount of congressional oversight that makes sure that these agencies are doing the job that they've been charged with. And so the fact that constitutional system, that design where Congress is the one that gets to write the statutes and decide how these agencies are structured, that's being undermined by the court is part of this broader power grab that we're seeing.
Lina Khan, good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight to give us some clarity on this. Lina Khan is the former chair of the Federal Trade Commission. She's now the director of the Columbia Law School Center for Law and the Economy. All right, coming up.